Environmental Science Associates.
Good morning, Jim. Thanks for joining us. Kim, how are you?
Good. Kim Carringer, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency.
My colleague, Jen. Muted Jen. There we go.
Everyone, Jen Mayer with Zephyr Collaboration.
Thank you. Dennis Zabaglo.
Dennis Zabaglo, Aquatic Resources Program Manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency.
Russell Norman.
Hi, Russell Norman, Water Resource Control Engineer with the Lahontan Waterboard.
Great. Victoria Ortiz.
Victoria Ortiz, Community Engagement Manager with Tahoe Regional Planning Agency.
Great. Observing is Director Joanne Marquetta. And might have just stepped away for just a second. And do we have Rob Tucker?
There you go.
Hi.
Good morning, everyone. Joanne Marquetta, TRPA.
Thanks, Joanne. And do we have Rob Tucker from Lahontan Waterboard? Okay. We already have a question in the Q&A room, which is the Q&A function is under your dock, which is that bottom bar at the bottom of your screen below the pictures that give you several tools. And in the Q&A is like how we'd like to interact with you today. We've got several of these panelists presenting for approximately 45 minutes. There's a lot of information to get through, but which is why it takes that long. Both during that presentation and after, we would like to collect your comments and questions in that question and answer period. That allows us to collate them and prepare answers for them, sometimes take them in batches if they're related, and also allows us to give more time to those questions, given how many people that we have in attendance today. So that's how we'd like to interact with you and collect your questions, is through the Q&A window. Again, about 45 minutes of presentation, and then we have a good bit of time after that to try to address your questions and your answers. Please know that tomorrow there is one more session during this public comment period that will be for the TRPA Advanced Planning Committee, conducted in their hearing style as they manage those meetings. So please know about that. As always, want to emphasize written comments to this technical document. Here I have been talking for about 3 minutes and haven't even mentioned that here we are for the meeting for Tahoe Keys Lagoons weeds management and a environmental documentation for a controlled methods test. Thank you for joining this meeting. And that we want your comments both today and especially also written on this technical document, because then they make it into the record and will be summarized and how they were considered in the final environmental document. So here we are again at the draft phase of environmental documentation. Number of weeks left in the public comment period. We want to thank you for joining today. And with that, I would like to hand it off to my presenters, who will again introduce themselves and lead the presentation today.
Great. So do you want us to do a round of introductions first, Kaylin?
I think we just did by doing mic check and letting us know who we are. Maybe just as each speaker starts, please remind us.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I will kick it off. Good morning, everyone. My name's Kimberly Carringer. I'm the Environmental Improvement Division Manager at the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And we have a few different speakers lined up today to give you an overview of the draft environmental impact statement and report on the Tahoe Keys Aquatic Weeds Control Methods Test. So before we dive in, I'd like to provide some context on the history, how we got here today, and where we are in this process. So a major priority of Lake Tahoe's environmental improvement program is to monitor, control, and eradicate the aquatic invasive weeds we currently have in the lake. Aquatic invasive weeds that are not native to Lake Tahoe are not only an unsightly nuisance to beachgoers and recreators, but they degrade Lake Tahoe's water quality and clarity, and they disrupt the natural ecosystem. And as I'm sure many of you are aware with dealing with weeds in your own backyard, they proliferate, they're very persistent, and they're tough to get rid of. Public and private partners have joined together over the last decade to control the spread of invasive weeds in the lake by collaborating across state lines, all the jurisdictions across Tahoe, engaged scientists, prioritize control areas, and have been trying new and innovative ways to remove weeds. And the biggest factor in that fight against weeds is the Tahoe Keys. Lake Tahoe scientists and natural resource managers have ranked it the top priority location for weed control. And that's because the large size of the infestation and its high recreational use by boaters in and out of the Keys, which can cause spread to different areas of the lake. Sorry, Dennis, my screen just changed, so I can't see my screen anymore. Can you take that slide down real quick, Dennis? Okay, I've got it fixed. Okay, so over the last few years, the homeowners, EIP partners, TRPA, and organizations such as League to Save Lake Tahoe, the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, have been working together to try to figure out where and when to even start to solve such a daunting challenge as the Tahoe Keys. First of all, it's 172 acres of waterways, and the sheer size of that infestation doesn't allow for an expedient or easy solution. And second, the infestation is within a private residential area, but it's a major public access point to Lake Tahoe for the boating public. So lastly, solving the weed issue garners major interest from stakeholders region-wide, such as yourselves that are joining us today. It's true that the weed infestation is not just a Tahoe Keys problem, it's a lake-wide problem that requires strong collaboration amongst many partners around the region. So TKPOA has tried many methods of weed control over the last 40 years, and they've engaged experts to try to find different solutions. Back in 2018, after some years of research and discussions amongst the homeowners, they decided to ask the agencies if they could expand their toolbox. Is aquatic herbicides on the table in this fight? Both TKPOA and the agencies knew at that time that would not be an easily made decision. Aquatic herbicides, while utilized in many other parts of the country, have never been permitted as a control method in Lake Tahoe before. And while some believe it may be the only solution to significantly knock back and gain control of the infestation in Tahoe Keys, others would prefer it be the last option or never be introduced. The agencies and TKPOA agreed at that time on two things. First, we agreed that before the agencies could make a determination on herbicide, there would need to be a comprehensive environmental analysis of the potential environmental impacts of that proposal. And we also agreed to initiate a broad stakeholder engagement process to ensure we engaged others in taking that comprehensive look on how to treat weeds in the Keys. So over the last 2 years, we've formed several stakeholder committees, and what resulted from that stakeholder process was a lot of good information sharing and discussion of differing viewpoints on the infestation. It was through that process, or the process right now, we found that stakeholders do want to work together to try to solve one of the lake's most pressing environmental challenges. Everyone recognizes what a complicated and difficult challenge it is, and everyone wants to find long-term solutions to protect the treasure we all love. We heard that people felt they needed to learn more about the different possible treatment options in the Keys before a long-term treatment strategy could be developed. So the stakeholder committee helped shape the current project you'll hear about today, which is to conduct a test of a variety of different control methods in the Tahoe Keys. This testing program would allow TKPOA and resource managers to study, analyze, and compare a variety of different options, both herbicide and non-herbicidal, prior to developing, evaluating, and implementing a future large-scale control project in the Keys. So a couple last quick things before I hand it over to our next speaker. This document provides the environmental analysis of potential environmental effects of conducting the test. This document does not provide a project recommendation, but rather provides the analysis that will serve as the tool that will lead for the lead agencies in the decision-making process. This document is a result of an intensive scientific study over the last year, and we are looking for your feedback on the adequacy, the completeness, and the conclusions in that analysis. The final project decision that will come later after this analysis is finalized will be on if the test should be implemented and what methods should be included in that test. And finally, if the controlled methods test is approved, data from that test test will inform the development of a long-term strategy for the Keys. And another environmental analysis will need to be conducted for the full-scale treatment project. So we thank you very much for joining today and appreciate the time you've taken to learn about this project and attend this webinar. We hope to reach a really broad audience throughout the region this summer to get feedback on this analysis. So with that, I will hand it over to Dennis Zabaglo to tell you more about the aquatic invasive species control that's going on in Lake Tahoe and provide an overview of the details of the proposed project and the alternatives. Thank you.
Whatever you just did, fix the slide, Dennis, so thank you.
Okay, sorry everyone. Thanks, Kim, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your interest in this project. As Kim said, I'm Dennis Zabaglo. I'm the Aquatic Resources Program Manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and I oversee the implementation of the region's AIS program. As I think a lot of you know, TRPA and our partners have been implementing aquatic invasive weed control projects in the lake for some time, and we've had a lot of success, but the main thing we've learned is that multiple methods are needed. One tool cannot do the job alone. And let's move forward here. So what we're doing now is we're harnessing all those lessons learned, essentially, and tackling the biggest challenge that we have from an aquatic invasive species standpoint, and that is the Tahoe Keys. It's our highest prioritized location. It's 30 times bigger than any other project we've attempted to date. Every marina in the lake can fit within a small portion of the Keys. Difficult conditions like loose organic layer at the bottom or a muck layer and poor visibility within the Keys make some of our tried and true methods like bottom barriers and with divers very difficult to employ at best. And as Kim mentioned, a test approach was shaped in a collaborative setting, which includes an examination of new tools as they are truly needed for this location. The test of aquatic herbicides, as previously mentioned, is part of that proposal, but it also includes innovative methods like UV light and laminar flow aeration, where Tahoe has served as a proving ground, if you will, for these technologies. And while UV light and laminar flow aeration have revealed some exciting results, their use has been limited and at fairly small scales. So this approach aims to test all of these methods in standalone applications and in combination. So what has happened so far? A massive data collection effort that you'll hear about from Jim Good here in a moment, but that resulted in over 1.5 million data points that allowed us to truly understand the existing conditions that are really necessary to analyze potential impacts of the test project. And also, a model was built to better understand how nutrients cycle within the Tahoe Keys, really critical pieces of information. We held multiple workshops and meetings last summer to obtain your feedback during the scoping period. We had over 300 comments during that process that showed there was broad support for this test approach. We also had a lot of comments that stated physical modifications should be considered, as well as support for and against herbicide use. So project alternatives that we'll discuss here in a minute were developed in response to those comments. So in the meantime, a boat backup station continues to be in use at the west channel of Tahoe Keys that allows boats to shed attached plants that may accumulate on their props and other parts of the boat. And that's complemented by a bubble curtain and sea bins and this wall of bubbles essentially with these passive collectors that help fragments from leaving the Keys and into the rest of the lake. So this chart here represents the proposed project by the Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association, and it was refined with stakeholder input, along with the project alternatives by the lead agencies that were, as I mentioned, were shaped by that public comment during the scoping period. So the test project would be implemented over a 3-year time frame and is intended to test initial treatment methods that are likely to achieve extensive weed reduction in a one-time application in a first year. And then that would be followed up with maintenance or spot treatment methods in year 2 and 3. So those initial treatments in year 1 are referred to as group A methods, and they include specific aquatic herbicides, UV light treatments, in both standalone and combination approaches. And then also the laminar flow aeration would be tested as a group A method. And I'll explain these latter two, UV light and laminar flow, a bit more detail in a moment. But the maintenance or follow-up spot treatment methods are referred to as group B, and were selected because they can be effective at dealing with some smaller plots of weeds after that initial treatment. So these include bottom barriers where feasible, but also hand pulling and suction that can be done in that more kind of follow-up approach. And also UV light can be used as a spot treatment as well. So the alternatives, including using only the alternatives developed include using only non-herbicide methods, and then one that relies on dredging of the substrate, so getting rid of that muck layer. And lastly, there's a required no project alternative that is essentially maintaining the status quo within the keys. So control methods in the test project would be implemented in 21 locations, as you can see here on the map. And they were selected, these sites were selected to ensure the test accounts for the inherent variability within the keys and to have triplicate testing of methods to ensure a scientifically rigorous design. The map here shows those proposed locations, including control sites that are used as reference. In total, these sites represent about 41 acres of the overall area. And as mentioned previously, the keys is about 170 acres in total. So this is an example of how a combination approach might take shape, using herbicides along the edges of the channels with UV light going down the center. So input from the UV light treatment developer suggests that variable conditions along the edges of the channels make the UV light use a little bit more difficult in those locations. So this combination intends to try to maximize the impact of both of those techniques with limiting the amount of herbicide use. So in response to comments received, the non-herbicide alternative would be very similar to the proposed project, but removing the use of those herbicides. It would include UV light and laminar flow aeration as control methods. And for those unfamiliar, the UV light uses a specific wavelength that when plants are exposed, cell walls and DNA are damaged, resulting in dieback of the leaves and stems. And the laminar flow aeration would also be tested, and it's a method to create a consistent oxygen level from the bottom and below the bottom in the substrate all the way to the surface. And the sediment layer, that muck, is often lower in oxygen. And if oxygen levels can be increased, it is expected to break down that muck or organic layer and in turn result in fewer plants in that affected area. So this map here is a representation of that alternative with UV light and laminar flow aeration, and again with control sites. And then the second alternative would use dredging as a primary means of control. This method would rely on the excavation of that bottom substrate to remove the plants themselves, along with the turions, which are the little seeds curly pondweed uses to reproduce, and the roots of the plants themselves. Removal of that layer includes the entrained nutrients, and that would be replaced with a substrate that may be less likely or less suitable for plant growth. And then brought a geotechnical expert on board as well to help shape this alternative. And while it's likely challenging and expensive, it was included because of the significant comments that suggested that a modification approach should be considered. And so this map here represents where those proposed locations could be, again, along with control sites. So during scoping, several comments on the no project alternative were received that strongly suggested we take a hard look at what that would mean to the rest of the lake if nothing was approved. The team conducted a detailed analysis that is not typically done for a project, a no project alternative. In this scenario, TRPA would continue with harvesting and fragment collection and other activities that are allowed under their existing approvals, but the test would not take place and you would have nothing to learn. And then increasing the time it would take to address the situation within the keys and the infestation there and what that means to the risk to the lake at large. So now I'm going to turn it over to Russell Norman from the Lahontan Waterboard, and he's going to give some context on the regulatory framework.
Thanks, Dennis. This is Russell Norman with Lahontan Waterboard. And, you know, so the culmination of this process will be both TRPA and Lahontan Waterboard issuing permits for the project, the selected project. And there's several factors to consider here, or considerations that, you know, we've been tracking through the environmental review process toward that end. And It's of note that Lahontan Waterboard will be handling the federal water quality permitting for the project. And the methods that Dennis discussed and others have discussed previously that are part of the proposed test project, with the exception of the chemical discharges, all those methods could be permitted under the current WDRs that the keys are under, or with 404, 401 permitting, and would not require this CEQA review, a basin plan exemption from Lahontan, or an MPDS permit. The proposed chemical discharges trigger this CEQA, a Lahontan basin plan exemption, because the chemicals include aquatic herbicides, and the CEQA analysis. So I want to make that point. The other complicating factor in this project and the permitting is that Lake Tahoe is special status water, as you all know, and the lagoons are connected to Lake Tahoe, and regulatory agencies consider them one and the same. And Lake Tahoe is designated an outstanding national resource water. And as such, it gets the highest level of protection. Next slide, please, Dan. So those factors, the chemical discharge and the special status waters of Lake Tahoe, result in enhanced permitting environmental review requirements for this project. So as noted, because the proposed chemical discharge is aquatic herbicide, and a base plan exemption from the Lahontan Basin Plan is required for the discharge of pesticides. And then, as noted, federal water quality permitting will be required, and both the Lahontan Basin Plan and federal water quality permitting require anti-degradation analysis around the discharges of chemical substances. And that analysis and policies and provisions of the anti-degradation, both state and federal, provide the highest level of protection for RWS. Next slide, please. So drilling into the basin plan exemption, some of the key requirements, we'll have to demonstrate as we bring this item before our board for approval, and TRPA as well, are, again, this environmental impact report. That will be the first things the boards deliberate on. And then an MPDS permit with anti-degradation analysis, that is the federal and state water quality permitting element of the project. The project will, we'll have to demonstrate compliance with the anti-degradation policies for the selected project. And if chemical, is selected, we have to demonstrate minimum discharges of chemical substances for effective treatment, describe why non-chemicals have not been effective at addressing the weeds, and also provide a peer-reviewed biological monitoring reporting program. Next slide, please. So with respect to the anti-degradation, and I'll just note that I think some of the other presenters had pointed out that there's elements of this project that we've given extra consideration, and throughout the process we've had our eye on the ultimate permitting of whatever alternative or proposed project we select, or that is approved in the interim. How we can meet anti-degradation, and do we have the information in the environmental analysis to do that? And so a lot of the data for water quality and the kind of non-discretionary elements of anti-degradation analysis are included in the environmental review document. And we've had that on our radar as we move through the process. So the key considerations here for the chemical discharges, again, are that they do not cause long-term degradation of baseline water quality. The policies and provisions of anti-degradation do provide for short-term degradation within the application and treatment areas of the aquatic herbicides. And current guidance, and this is going to be a discretionary item for the board, is that short-term water quality degradation is a degradation of weeks to months, not years. And again, you know, that duration of degradation is addressed, for instance, chemical compounds and some of the environmental impacts in the environmental document as we have it, and that information will be presented in a draft anti-degradation analysis. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Good, who's going to discuss the evaluation of water quality effects of the project and alternative.
Oh, sorry, I was muted there for a second. Thank you, Russell, and good morning. We evaluated a wide variety of environmental effects to different resources, everything from air quality to recreation to transportation. But today I'm really going to focus in on the potential effects to water quality and other aquatic resources. All of the project activities are proposed in the lagoon water. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So in our evaluations, we had basically 5 steps. We first asked ourselves, well, what are the water quality constituents that could be affected by these project actions? Second, what are the existing baseline conditions? We did an extensive 2019 baseline evaluation to address that. Third, we defined 13 potential water quality environmental health issues. And fourth, we evaluated both the direct and indirect effects of the project and alternatives on each of those 13 issues. And finally, there's a lot of documentation and information available now for you to review. Our team included 5 PhD specialists in different areas of aquatic science. So this by no means was a one-man show here. Next slide, please. So in this first step, we started with really dozens of water quality standards that are in the TRPA thresholds and also in the basin plan. And based on the initial studies that we completed over 2 years ago and consultation with staff from TRPA and from Lahontan Waterboard, we boiled this down to these 10 constituents that are particularly important and potentially affected by the project. So you don't see things like radioactivity on this list. They're in the basin plan as a water quality standard, but we didn't evaluate that for this project. Next, please. So the 2019 study, these 2 gentlemen and others of us were out there nearly every day for 6 months, collecting data on the physical, chemical, and biological characteristic of the lagoons. So some of the different activities, and all of these are described in Appendix E of the EIR-EIS, starting with 15-minute interval monitoring of water temperature, dissolved oxygen, and pH at 13 different stations, both at shallow and deep depths. This was really important because we knew that water quality conditions within the lagoons are highly variable. And so it was important to take a look at those differences. So these include, the differences that occur throughout the season, the variability between daytime conditions when photosynthesis is active and during the night. And then also the differences that you see from near the surface of the water to down deep in the water, particularly when there's stratification and the water's not circulating. All of these have a lot to do with the other water quality constituents that are observed. We also had this continuous 15-minute monitoring of precipitation. And as is typical, there was very little rainfall during this 6-month period. And we also had continuous monitoring of water levels in each of the 3 lagoons. Twice a month, we measured the depth to groundwater in wells that we positioned around the perimeter of the lagoons. And we measured water quality profiles at 1-foot intervals from the top down to the bottom at these 13 lagoon stations. And again, that was really important for defining when and where there was circulation versus stratification, which affects other water quality conditions. Once a month, we collected samples of water from the lagoons and had those analyzed by a lab for nutrients and chlorophyll. Several times during the 6 months, we also collected groundwater samples and had those analyzed for nutrients. We measured turbidity in each of the lagoons in different locations. It was June and October when we conducted the fish and benthic macroinvertebrate surveys. These are described in Appendix G. And July is when we did our sediment sampling and when TRC performed the terrestrial biology and wetland delineation surveys. This map is a little hard to see, but there's 13 yellow dots in there that show the water quality stations that were monitored in each of the 3 lagoons. And getting on to the third step here with identifying water quality issues, in the environmental health section 3.2, there were 6 issues that mostly had to do with protecting beneficial uses. The first issue, we looked at what's the potential exposure and health risk to workers that would be applying herbicides. Secondly, we addressed the question of how long the herbicides might persist in the lagoon environment. Third, we looked at whether drinking water supplies would be protected. Fourth, we considered the toxicity to non-target plants and animals. Fifth, the aluminum toxicity issue has to do with aluminum that is existing in the sediments and potential harmful effects to cold water fish primarily. And then sixth is the question of, could this testing of weed control methods increase the occurrence of harmful algal blooms? For the water quality section 334, the 7 potential water quality issues there were all about the compliance with water quality standards for different constituents. Go ahead, please. Yes, and so our fourth question here, and fourth step in evaluating direct and indirect water quality effects. At the beginning of each of these 13 different issues and in the EH and water quality sections, you'll find that we've described the methods and assumptions that we used. There were some differences for each one of these questions and how we approached them, and that's all described there. We really focused on protecting the lagoon receiving waters. The water quality standards apply right there in the lagoons, and we don't rely on dilution within the big body of water of Lake Tahoe. So if you protect water quality within the lagoons, then you're going to be pretty safe that you're protecting water quality out in the larger lake. So the evaluations for water quality really boiled down to 3 key questions. First, how long would herbicide chemicals be detectable? So that ties into the anti-degradation requirements that Russell was just speaking about. Second, would water quality standards be met? And third, would beneficial uses be protected? On this first question, we started with the aquatic pesticide application plan that was prepared by TKPOA in 2018. And we looked at that and eliminated panoxylum as one of the chemicals to be tested for 2 reasons. First of all, it requires multiple applications, and second, it had a much longer persistence than the other herbicides that were proposed. We also looked at the work there. There was mesocosm studies and literature reviews that TKPA used to propose specific concentrations. But to be on the conservative and protective side, we based our evaluations on the maximum allowable application rates for each one of those herbicide products. We also needed to research the lowest attainable lab reporting limits. So we went out to contract laboratories. We identified who was capable of doing the work of analyzing not just the active ingredients, but also chemical degradation byproducts for each one of these products. And so the answer came back that the reliable reporting limit would be about 1 part per billion for each of the chemicals. So based on that maximum label rate and the 1 part per billion reporting limit, using information on the degradation rates for each of the chemicals, and assuming no dilution, we arrived at some ranges of persistence for each of the proposed chemicals, ranging from 6 to 36 days for fluoroperoxyfen benzyl, up to less than 120 days for triclopyr. So ultimately, it will be up to the Lahontan Waterboard to determine how these estimated persistence periods fit with the anti-degradation requirement that the herbicide chemicals cannot be detected for more than weeks to months and not years. Second question, would water quality standards be met? Well, first, the 2019 baseline study showed that already the standards are not met pre-project for at least 6 water quality constituents. So really the question comes to, would any of these water quality constituents, would the conditions get worse under any of the proposed activities or under no action? So there were several considerations in answering this question. You know, we looked at the timing and the extent of activities. We looked at specific protective measures that were built into how those activities would be performed. We also considered where real-time monitoring of water quality could be used to adjust the methods or the pace of work to meet water quality standards. In many cases, we came up with additional mitigation measures that should be incorporated into the alternatives. And of course, we used information from the literature, including monitoring information from other projects that had similar use of these weed control methods. And all of this information informed our expectations for the extent and duration of effects. So some examples of our findings with turbidity: we expect short-term increases during bottom barrier removal or during suction dredging or discharge of dewatering effluent in the case of the suction dredging alternative. Turbidity can be minimized or controlled. Turbidity curtains would need to be used at dredging test sites, and spill control and treatment would need to be implemented for the dewatering effluent before it could be discharged. And turbidity monitoring during all activities could easily be performed with that information used during the work to make adjustments as needed to the methods or the pace of work. For dissolved oxygen, we didn't have any concerns for direct oxygen demand based on information on the herbicide products, but certainly there's a concern for oxygen demand from decomposing plants, and particularly how that affects cold water fish. So it's important that treatments are conducted when the plants are small, so that the plant material that's decaying is minimized. And secondly, should be deployed during this period of plant decomposition to offset the oxygen demand. For pH, we also had no concerns for direct pH changes from the herbicide products, mostly because the quantity of herbicide product compared to the volume of the lagoon treatment sites is pretty small. For phosphorus and nitrogen, we had a much more in-depth evaluation process that included developing a nutrient loading and cycling model that we found in Appendix F of the draft EIR-EIS. Some of the key findings there were that most of the nitrogen and phosphorus in the lagoons is in the plant tissues, not in the water. So plant decay becomes the biggest nitrogen and phosphorus source in the main lagoon. Now it's a little different in Lake Talac. In Lake Talac, you have a much larger watershed area with more stormwater. You also have much more contributing groundwater. And so there, those external sources together are a little greater than the internal sources from plant decay in Lake Talac. We also found that algal productivity indicated by chlorophyll was closely related in the main lagoon to the concentration of nutrients in the water. That was not the case in Lake Talac, where they were not correlated. We think that's because tannins in the water in Lake Talac are inhibiting algal productivity. So what this tells us is that it's in the main lagoon where there's a greater potential for sensitivity to increases in nutrients from plant decay in this risk of more algal productivity. So there are ways to minimize the temporary increase of nutrients during the weeks of plant decay. You know, again, you do the treatments when the plants are small. And second of all, Phoslock could be applied to inactivate phosphorus. So Phoslock is a bentonite clay product that contains a rare earth mineral called lanthanum. So if you sprinkle Phoslock granules on the surface of the water, as it falls down through the water column, the phosphorus molecules are strongly bound to the lanthanum, and they remain bound and unavailable for algae when they rest in the sediments. So this set of pie charts shows the difference between the main lagoon and Lake Talac in terms of where the phosphorus is coming from. So on the left pie chart there in the green, you can see that more than 2/3 of the phosphorus is coming from plant decay. And the second largest piece of the pie there in blue, about 13% of the phosphorus is coming from stormwater and irrigation of landscapes. So, you know, the main lagoon has a very small watershed. It's really just those areas between the lagoons where there's a little bit of land surface. In Lake Talac, it's different. You have a much larger watershed area. And so now in blue, the source from stormwater and irrigation landscapes is more than half of the phosphorus loading. And the second big piece there in Lake Talac is phosphorus coming from plant decay. Next, please. So this diagram here shows simply how on the left in the spring to early summer, there's nitrogen and phosphorus coming from the sediments up into the green part of the plant tissues. And then by summer, you've got the peak growth of the plants, and there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus up there in the green part of the plant. And then in the summer or the fall, when the plants die back, about half of that nitrogen and phosphorus gets released into the water column. Yes, so the third question, would beneficial uses be protected? So first, looking at human health, we had information from product registration and safety data sheets and other literature, and we found that there's no potential to exceed drinking water standards. We also found that the acute risk or chronic exposure would not be present for workers applying the herbicides, and that the containment and protective measures and the monitoring and contingency plans in the aquatic pesticide application plan would provide a safety factor to protect people. For the increased harmful algal bloom occurrence at test sites during nutrient release from decomposing plants, it's very important to treat the plants when they're small. Aeration can be used so the surface waters are not stagnant and warm. So that aeration would make the conditions for harmful algal blooms less favorable. I mentioned the phosphorus inactivation. This is the Phoslock product that would essentially starve the algae from an essential nutrient. And then finally, the testing and public notice program that was started by TKPOA in 2017 when cyanobacteria were first noticed there in the lagoons, that will continue. And so if there are reports of cyanobacteria, either at test site locations or outside of that, TKPOA will continue with their program of collecting samples, having the lab analyze those to see if there are cyanotoxins present and at what levels. And then based on that information, they will provide information to the public and the visitors and residents, including putting up warning signs if that's appropriate with the level of cyanotoxins that are found. As for potential impacts to non-target aquatic life from the herbicides, again, there's information in that product registration and safety data sheets and other literature on this. We have information from our 2019 surveys on the presence of aquatic life in the lagoons, and we applied US EPA risk assessment methods to take a look at the potential impacts. Again, I didn't mention this before, but the most important way to protect non-target aquatic life is to conduct pre-treatment surveys. So in the spring, before any herbicide application or UV light or anything that would target killing aquatic weeds, you need to take another survey to make sure that there's not a nice stand of desirable native plants that would be affected. And so with those surveys, the boundaries or locations of test sites could be adjusted to minimize non-target impacts. So we would expect that there would be some individuals that would be killed, individual plants, but negligible impacts to the non-target plant communities overall. As for other potential impacts to non-target aquatic life, we would expect some non-target plants and invertebrates would be burned by UV light or buried by bottom barriers. But again, overall, for the non-target communities, we would expect minimal impacts. And fish and other mobile organisms would swim or crawl away as soon as they sensed the activities and disturbance. Again, the deoxygenation during plant decomposition, which can be harmful to cold water fish, would be managed by aeration. And the potential aluminum toxicity to fish would be managed by controlling the sediment disturbance using real-time turbidity monitoring. And finally, the rapid recolonization and long-term benefits to plant and animal communities from testing aquatic weed control over more than 20% of the lagoon area, we think that that would provide a net benefit to these beneficial uses. So there's a lot of information available for you to review. The baseline water quality information is in Appendix E, and the fish and benthic macroinvertebrate surveys are in Appendix G of the EIS. The draft nutrient loading technical memo is Appendix F, and we have these three different sections in the main body of the document for environmental health, water quality, and aquatic biology and ecology. And as Russell Norman mentioned, the anti-degradation analysis report is in progress and will be released later this year. So that concludes my part of it. I'll pass it back to Dennis Zabaglo.
All right, thank you, Jim. And before we move into comments, I'll sum up what was presented. So you heard from Russell Norman of Lahontan regarding the anti-degradation analysis. It is a component required by CEQA and the Lahontan Waterboard if any aquatic herbicides are to be used. We had originally forecasted this document to be released for comment now during the same comment period for the draft document. But because the anti-degradation analysis relies on the water quality technical information within this draft document, it's going to be released a little bit later in the process. So the anti-degradation analysis basically summarizes the information within this draft document, so regulatory determination can be made about the duration of impacts. It does require the state water board and EPA review, which will be occurring over the next months, and we'll hold a separate comment period, and that's currently forecasted towards the end of this year. So 2 important things to note about that. First, the majority of the technical water quality information about the degradants of herbicides is included within this draft document in the water quality section, and we want your comments on that. And then second, there will be another opportunity to provide feedback on the anti-degradation analysis once it's released. You also heard from Jim Good. He and his team of scientists conducted an independent analysis that looked at several natural resource areas. And what is being reported by them is that if the control methods test can be implemented with careful protection measures, impacts are expected to be less than significant. Some of those protective measures identified in the analysis includes that regardless of the methods approved, treating the weeds at the right time is critical. Treatment needs to occur early in the growing season when the biomass is low, and the use of aeration when needed. This will help prevent oxygen depletion and excessive nutrient release and the formation of harmful algal blooms. Also, real-time monitoring should occur in order to make adjustments during implementation to ensure those water quality standards are being met. And in addition, conducting those pre-treatment surveys Jim mentioned to avoid the non-target plant communities and that the test sites are appropriate. So essentially what we're trying to understand in the analysis of a test is, can all the proposed methods be tested or just some? And what we want to hear from you is, have those potential impacts been addressed adequately? Are the protective measures sufficient? And is the range of alternatives reasonable? So where can the document be found and how can you provide input? So the draft document and appendices can be found on TRPA's website, shown here on the slide. We recognize the current circumstances that we're all experiencing are challenging, and this issue is complex. So we have a 60-day comment period that incorporates multiple workshops like this one to ensure the public has ample opportunity to review the document and the information and to provide comments on the technical adequacy of the environmental analysis and range of alternatives. So comments can be made today and also during webinars tomorrow. We have an advisory planning commission, but also through the US mail or the email address found here. So some upcoming milestones you can anticipate. The public comment period for the draft environmental document ends on September 3rd. And again, that can be found on you can submit comments for more information at the TahoeKeysWeeds.org website. The anti-degradation analysis that's been mentioned will be released late in the latter part of this year. And the final document in response to comments around the end of the year. And then board certifications, both TRPA and Lahontan's board, in the spring of 2021, and with potential implementation of a test project in the late spring of 2021. So I want to thank you for your time and interest in this important project. This is really a major milestone in solving the problem of the aquatic invasive weed issue in the Tahoe Keys. So this is a tremendous step. It's a big commitment by all of our partners. And so we thank you for your interest and we look forward to seeing your input. Thank you.
And it's just about time to move to question and answer period. But first I wanted to bring you to the project website. Likely many of you are familiar with it. If not, please take a look at TahoeKeysWeeds.org. This is a place where you can submit written comments on the project, learn some background information about the project, and track public events, though there are only a couple of left during this public comment period, but you can find those here. Also wanted to bring to your attention some new materials that might be useful for you, or especially for folks who are still learning about this project, including a new story map, which describes the question and the challenge. With that, I would like to move towards comments and questions. And here is how we're going to do it, because we've got several in the question and answer window that we can go directly to. And we've got a couple that have come in by email in the background, and some of them are related. So I'm going to go to the question and answer window first. And on a couple of these, I may stop and connect them. I'll share my screen and show you some questions that came in by email. And throughout this, we will take some of these as comments and questions. If there are answers to the questions, we will look to the project team to provide them. The types of answers that we have right now are about the process and the findings of this technical document. Don't have answers about decision-making and which alternative and some things about permitting yet. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take your comments, questions, and preferences. So I'm going to start by reading the list. And again, I'm going to connect these to some of the questions we've gotten in the background by email. So the first two by David Blau and the Ligue de Save Lake Tahoe, I'm just going to read so that they're on the record. Please know, by the way, that we are recording this session, and we're doing that mostly so that we have the presentation section captured and we could display it to other people. We're going to keep recording this session, and there's nothing to that. I just wanted you to not be surprised. I wanted you to know that we're doing that. So let's record these first two as comments. In that the League is happy to see that the proposed project has less than significant impacts to environmental health, water quality, and aquatic biology. The League feels strongly that all tools need to be tested during the 3-year controlled testing period. That's what a testing program is for. They're skeptical that action alternative 1, which features just UV and laminar flow aeration in category A, can come anywhere close to meeting the project goal of reducing the plant biomass by 75% and may lose risk losing 3 years. We have a comment from an anonymous attendant below that asks about that 75% figure. We'll get that in just a minute. This is another comment from the League, which is that happy to see the treatment of the full treatment of the no action alternative, which makes a compelling case for action and minimal delay. Can't afford to waste 3 years on tools that won't solve the problem. UV doesn't kill roots and turions, and LFA is probably best used for spot treatment. Again, taking these as comments from the League to Save Lake Tahoe for the agencies to consider as they move from the draft to the final document. This is one where I want to group this with a couple of questions that we got by email. So David Blau says here, when will the anti-degradation analysis be released so that we have the full picture? And it needs to be done in concert with the draft and final environmental document. Please let me share briefly some other questions that we got on the same topic. Toby writes that the Administrative Procedures Act, the Administrative Procedures Update for the anti-degradation policy for NPDES permitting states that when a discharge is included in a project requiring CEQA documentation, the anti-degradation analysis should be integrated in the environmental review process. In addition, in the appendix, which is EPA's guidance on implementing anti-deg provision, it states, actions covered by anti-degradation provisions include but are not limited to the following: other actions, major federal actions pursuant to NEPA and ESA. Therefore, the anti-deg analysis must be presented with the draft EIR/EIS and was not and has not been released. In light of this, does the Waterboard and TRPA plan on extending the comment deadline? And so what I'd like to do is both Russell and Dennis have spoken about the timing of the AA and when it comes out, but I think it's worth repeating some of that, the timing and how we get to it and when we get to it, and talking about the relationship of the EIS, the environmental document, and the AA, which are related documents, but not the same thing or the same processes. Can I turn to one of you two, Dennis or Russell, to highlight some of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. So as noted, the AA document write-up of the anti-degradation analysis will be released with the draft MPDS permit. And we're hoping to get that out here, as Dennis noted, before the end of the year. And that will have its own separate, public process, comment letter solicitation, possibly a board workshop. So there will be opportunity to comment on that element of the project. So, and again, it just addresses chemical discharges. So that will be what it covers. And further, as far as the water quality elements, there's no new analysis that is not presented in the environmental review that Jim just did the summary of. That's contained in the appendices and text of the draft EIR-EIS. So, Dennis, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that sums it up there.
And is there anything I didn't hit there, Kaylin, on the question?
I'm not sure, and I invite anybody to add a follow-up question if there's a piece of that we need to clarify. If it isn't already understood, and perhaps I'm restating that environmental documentation includes a lot of the technical data that will be used to consider the anti-degradation and development of a draft permit. So they're related processes referring to similar information and analysis, but different decisions done by different agencies. So please let me, for the sake of time, try to address the next question, and I'll just answer it and then stop and make sure that I didn't get it wrong. The anonymous attendee asked, why does the plan only include a 75% reduction of weeds? Russell, I'm going to mute you. Is it just to improve boating, or how does that improve the weed issue? A short answer that may be improved by either of the agencies or a technical person is that for the sake of this study, they're looking for a 75% knockback using methods that can address a large area, and then to look for management and mitigation options continuing forward in the future that manage the conditions that allow for weeds. So no, it is not just about improving boating, it is about improving water quality, but this test, remember that this is an environmental document regarding a test, not the implementation of a large-scale program, is seeking to ask, are there technologies, and if so, which, that could achieve as much as a 75% knockback so that other mechanisms could be used after that. Anybody else want to edit my summary to that answer? I'm going to move on to Sudeep's question. And this is one where I could use some help, I think, from Jim. Any idea how much nutrient storage, for example, phosphorus, is within the sediments, and in what scales of time is the nutrient stored or released? Jim, do you have enough to go on in that?
Yeah, let me briefly answer that. Dave Tomasco is the one that did the nutrient loading modeling work. And, we were all a little bit surprised to find that from our 2019 sediment sampling, the concentrations of nutrients in the sediments were really not very, very high. And Dave found a document that had nutrient concentrations from something like 50 other Sierra Nevada lakes. And we were kind of right in the middle of that range with the Tahoe Keys Lagoon. So it appears that what's happening is that the aquatic weeds are pretty efficient in taking nutrients from the sediments, and then that mass of nutrients is in the aquatic weed tissues and gets recycled and released into the water column, but has not been accumulating to a great degree in the sediments.
Jim, thanks for your help on that. If we need a follow-up, let us know. We did have a follow-up from the previous question. Let me address that right before I go to Kirk. Has several pieces. Toby mentioned from the previous questions about anti-DEG that she's bringing forth the APU, which calls for integration of the AA into environmental documentation. And so I at least want to acknowledge that that's put forth by Toby to be considered by both lead agencies. And I don't know that there's anything else to say about integration and timing at this moment, Dennis or Russell. Otherwise, I think we will collect that guidance that she submitted for consideration and what happens in next steps. Let me unmute you. There we go. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to point out that's guidance, and we management and our legal team, have requested that we continue work on the draft AA that we have prepared. So again, it will be provided, and it has been the provisions of any degradation have been considered in the environmental analysis in the draft document presented. So that's all I have to add.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Russell, if I wasn't muted when I said that before. So Jim, I think I need help with Kirk. So I'm going to read them all at once just so that I can get them out, and then let's decide what to do with them. But first, since the Keys Lagoons are considered Tier 3 and require attendant protection, for example, from invasive species, impacts on water quality and native ecosystems, why would the lead agency support the use of well-proven scale feasible current technologies to manage the advanced plant populations? Integrated use of EPA, Cal EPA approved aquatic herbicides. If there's a lead agency that has a comment that they want to add on that, that's fine. Let me make space for that in just a minute. But I think we can collect that as a comment, as a preference, which is similar to the comments that came from the league. You would like to see all methods tested, and go on to make some arguments here about how these have been approved aquatic herbicides in other places. And so why not go with a known technology, I believe is the core of the comment. I hope I summarized well enough. So let's collect that as that. Here's a question, so the next one is about alternatives and how the alternatives were treated. Is the risk of relying solely on unproven non-herbicide methods, for example, UV light, bottom barriers, has that been fully vetted, and how are these risks quantified? Jim, is there enough to go on in that question? Do we need any more information to help talk to a question about the risks from different alternatives, including those not including herbicides? I got to admit, I struggle a little bit with that question.
Yes, Kaylin, I am a little bit as well. So we have obviously alternatives that include herbicide, and alternative that is light and flow aeration herbicides. And so we've addressed the environmental effects of those different alternatives in the document. So in terms of quantifying risks, I guess I would maybe need a little bit more specificity in that question, but I think this is one that we can take away and consider further.
Okay. Likewise, we may need to do similar on the other, but there's been previous questions about what it means to talk about maximum label rates and applications. So let's take a look at what we got here. The assumption that herbicide residue levels will result from maximum label rates distorts the estimates and modeling of actual dissipation, degradation, dilution. This premise ignores the fact that target weed susceptibility is variable and driven by active concentration and contact time. The proposed rates account for this differential susceptibility based on published lab, mesocosm, and field data. Why can't the Water Board specify rates consistent with the proposed project?
Yes, I think what we did here in the EIR-EIS was say, well, let's start out and evaluate what if, rather than the lower rates that were prepared by TKPOA, based on some really good work with the mesocosm study and other studies looking at a dye and how a comparable dissolved constituent might persist in the water with the dye studies and so on. We took a look in the environmental evaluation at the maximum label rates for a couple of reasons. One is that if you evaluate the maximum label rate and you come through all of the analyses and it looks fine, it looks like you can protect the environment, and that is the maximum level that would be allowed, that would have the greatest opportunity to be successful in knocking back the weed populations, then we're good. It's still fine to go forward with a project that's been approved and apply a lesser concentration if there's enough confidence that it's going to be effective in getting that desired result in the knockback of the aquatic weeds. But by taking this more conservative approach, we've been able to show some estimates of persistence that will be conservative, and with dilution and with the other factors that are mentioned here in this comment, I think that we've got some confidence that those are protective and conservative estimates of persistence.
Jim, thanks. Kirk, if we missed a piece of that, we'll find a way to unmiss it. For future a comment from the league, for future presentations, I respectfully request spend less time on data collection and more time on the comparison of the proposed project and the two primary alternatives. That's what the decision is all about. Noted, fine. There aren't a lot of presentations left during this public comment period, but it is, I'm glad you brought this up in order to highlight what was mentioned by Kim Carringer at the top of the presentation, which is that when the AA and draft NPDES permit come out, which will be around the same time as TRPA is working to move from the draft to the final, so that the final is almost prepared or almost ready. Right about that time will be another public engagement exercise, probably meeting with the stakeholder committees in advance, but public sessions during that time, because that is when the agencies will be making a decision. That's when TRPA will be finalizing their technical environmental document and pointing towards a proposed project, and water boards will be deciding whether their regulatory standards have been met and can proceed with permitting. It'll be a draft permit, of course, at that time. So noted, and that's also an opportunity to clarify that, once again, right now we're at the environmental review phase of this and moving into the decision-making phase of this as we move towards draft and final. Lori Kemper offers that why is there not an alternative that uses non-chemical methods first, and after monitoring an assessment on meeting success criteria, that only if that criteria is not met, then a test using herbicides is assessed. This would be a new alternative. Could the document be written, could the document as written be used in this manner? I didn't get it quite right, but I'm with you. Use non-chemical method first and only consider combined no chemical methods later. A suggestion about a phased approach where you work with the, I think it's worth, Jim, probably doing a quick review of the type A methods. And I think the suggestion here is why not use the other type A methods or group one, I'm confusing projects and methodology. Those that are suitable for a large scale knockback and want to test those without testing herbicide and then moving from there. So we can certainly take that as a comment and a suggestion, including the question about can this document, this environmental document, be formatted and developed in such a way that supports that kind of sequence and process. Anybody want in on this? Otherwise, we can take this as a comment. Okay. Elise offers that both Jim and Dennis mentioned aeration. Why don't we install a quality aeration system now, such as the CleanFlow system, run it all the time. This was done in the ski run marina where it reduced the nutrient loading and muck by an average over 20 inches in a year by increasing oxygen, reducing loading and muck sediment. In addition, the ammonia has been shown to crash and then the weeds die when these systems are used. It will also have the benefit of deepening the channel so that the oxygen can be placed lower and therefore cover a larger area, plus the water will get colder if it's deeper. So, again, can take it as a suggestion. Aeration has been considered and included in some of these alternatives. Dennis, Jim, anything to offer at this moment?
Yeah, there is a pilot laminar flow aeration test going on within the Keys now. It's about 6 acres in size. I believe it was installed last year. They had some issues, I believe, with a compressor, but the intent is to be running it for a long period of time. And then as we move towards some level of an approved project, whatever alternative is approved down the road, additional laminar flow aeration could be part of that. And so we'll be building on what is happening now and continuing what the Keys is already doing.
So I can add to that briefly. That 6 acre LFA site in the main lagoon was installed and began operating in April 2019. And yeah, there was a period, I understand, when it was not operational, but it's up and running. It will continue to run through this proposed project. So there's, one of the 3 LFA test sites is the 6 acre site that was started in April 2019. So there'll be a good long test of the system at that site. And the design of the 3-year test does have the LFA systems running 24/7 year-round for the entire period of the test. And so there will be an opportunity to get this information. I think that the need for testing this in Tahoe Keys is because the effectiveness of this technology in reducing aquatic weed infestations is not yet proven in this environment. But this project will give it a good multi-year test.
Kim, go ahead.
Thanks, Kaylin. I just felt like jumping in at that point after hearing Lori's comment and a couple others that that we're not jumping in to answer quite yet. We're taking them as comments. I just wanted to say those types of comments that people have read the document are providing specific questions and details of questions they have on the analysis are really helpful. And we're listening and we're taking those right now and they're getting submitted as formal comments. We review those, we take those into account as we're reviewing the draft and responding to comments. So I just wanted to say that if we're not jumping in right away, we're listening, and those types of comments and questions are the most helpful that we can respond to.
Part of the big process this fall is summarizing and answering these comments and questions. Jen, I think we covered David's. I feel like another question went away somewhere, but Toby also offered that draft environmental document did not address inert ingredients. And a word that's new to me, adjuvants. Did I pronounce that correctly? Jim, anything to say about this?
Sure. Yeah, I don't remember if adjuvants was addressed directly, but we can certainly do that. The aquatic pesticide application plan states that adjuvants will not be used as part of the proposed herbicide applications, and the inert ingredients are part of what's considered with the permitting of the herbicide products. So that considers the impacts potentially both to human health and the environment of the inert ingredients as well as the active ingredients. So I think we've got this addressed, but we can have it stated more clearly.
Russell, did you want anything on that? You're
I
on
think
mute.
I'm muted.
No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out adjuvants aren't proposed for use. As Jim noted, the inerts depend on the product formulation and be covered in the MPDS permitting.
Thank you for that. From Madonna, herbicides and all methods rely on repeat action. When will we see details of the Group B support methods that tail beyond the response flow chart? So a question about when will there be additional detail about Group B methods and follow-on actions that would come. Yeah, so we can take this as is, and I think this will actually deserve some consideration. But I think the answer is, since this is about a controlled methods test, there wouldn't be a design of long-term follow-up of Group B methods until the next round of environmental analysis looking at long-term management. I think during this testing period, we would be testing the different Group B methods and how they work in combination with other things, but there wouldn't be a detailed plan written for ongoing management. Jim, I'm going to stop talking. How am I doing over here?
Well, let me put a little different bit of information on that, and that is that the Group B methods starting in the second year of the test would be basically designed using information from aquatic plant surveys that would occur after that first year. So if you find that there's areas that have small or large remaining infestations of different species of target plants, that could change the approach that you use at that particular test site in selecting which of the Group B methods to apply there. So I think the answer is that in years 2 and 3, those Group B support methods will be determined based on the monitoring results after the first year of Group A treatments.
Should have let you go first. Lori follows on to ask, are the results and success of non-chemical methods used in Tahoe Keys summarized in the environmental document? I assume that means the tests that have been conducted by the Keys and all of the work that's gone in the past that include non-chemical treatments. Is that summarized in the EIR? Dennis or Jim, where can, or Russell, where can people look to, is that in the EIR? And if not, where can people look to find, because there's extensive pages on several, both TKPOA and Waterboard and others on previous work and success. Do we have an answer for this question at the moment?
The EIR and the EIS, the draft documents, focus on potential impacts. And so the results of previous control methods will be identified in a separate, or I think part of the MPDS permit, and if any herbicides are proposed to be used or approved to be used, that's addressed in a separate permit that Lahontan and the state have to issue for an exemption to the herbicide prohibition. And so that's, I believe that's part of a staff report and supporting documents, but not in the environmental impact analysis itself.
Go ahead, Kim.
I'll just also plug the Tahoe Keys weeds.org website. There's a ton of information there on different weed activities as well. Weed control activities.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and this is Russell Lahontan. I would just add that, you know, the available data on non-chemical test methods from past and ongoing tests, as the ongoing test data is available, has been, you know, reviewed and in many cases referenced in the environmental document. And as Kim noted, our project-specific website as well as the Tahoe Keys websites contain a lot of those water quality reports or test project reports for those ongoing or past tests, and ongoing tests will be updated there as well.
Jen, are you all good? Did we get you in okay? Might need to do something to change Jen's status in the background. These are additional comments that we got by email. I'm monitoring our time. I know we're close to the end. If you have a hard stop at 11:30, I'm sorry that we're going to go just a couple minutes over here to address your questions. Please remember to go to the website, and please remember to submit written questions so that they can be addressed and summarized in the document. I'm going to keep taking the questions that we have here. First I want to share, according to the draft EIR, the size of the area's infestation and high recreational use pose a substantial risk of spreading weeds and spurring new infestations. Why does the plan not include installing a barrier to separate Keys from the lake until the problem is solved? It should be, otherwise anything else is a travesty. Dennis, do you want to speak to this being a controlled methods test and consideration of barriers, and if and when and why?
Yeah, I think this is something that's a comment and that can be responded to more directly in the response to comments period. And so I think we take this as a comment for now.
Okay, suggestion that a barrier is included in any of the controlled methods tests. Okay. The question here was about mowing and part of the technical analysis. Test sites will be mowed when and as needed on established test schedules. Both the treatments and mowing will reduce the biovolumes of weeds. Reductions in biovolumes due to treatments are essential data for comparing treatments. How can these reductions in biovolume possibly be measured accurately if the sites are mowed? Also, herbicide tests will be aerated after treatment to test potential control benefits. UV light sites will not be aerated. Why won't UV light sites be aerated? And then finally, coontail is a floating weed. UV treatment of coontail in the Keys is asserted to be infeasible. UV treatment of coontail at a Tahoe marina reduced coontail significantly. Why is UV light treatment of coontail in the Keys not feasible? Well, I think we're going to, I think the idea is to learn a lot more over the next 3 years about these methods. But Jim or Dennis, anything to do, can we start with the question about confounding data due to mowing? Are you getting in the way of comparing methods? Does mowing interfere with that and an apples to apples look at the different methods?
Kalen, I think this is one that we'll discuss more, but it will be important to quantify the reduction in biomass that occurs by doing the mechanical harvesting at test sites.
And regarding UV light and coontail, the pilot that has occurred at Lakeside Marina and Beach, the overwhelming majority of plants there are Eurasian water milfoil and curly pondweed. Coontail is not a primary weed there, like it is in the Tahoe Keys.
We've got two more comments, and then I think we're looking to wrap because we're just a little bit over time. I want to thank everybody for your thoughtful comments and remind y'all what Kim said a couple minutes ago, which is if there haven't been answers on these today, they are being submitted to the environmental documentation process and will be included in the summary and response to comments. So we got Lori's question. Toby offers again, and this was covered in email too, so I'm glad you wrote it here in the chat window, that several people have raised the fact that TKPOA has not fulfilled the prohibition exemption criteria of demonstrating the failure of non-chemical methods, and the agencies have yet to respond to this. I think a response is warranted. So comment noted that raising the exemption criteria, has that been met, and if so, how? Calling for a response to that question. And from TKPOA, Andy Campagna notes that previous actions and tests by the Keys are described in the application document submitted by the Keys, which is available on the Lahontan and Keys Weeds Management website. And so that goes back to Lori Kemper's previous question about results of other non-chemical methods that were used. And that has all of the written comments or questions that we received by email and in this chat window. That's a long time for you all to stay plugged into a very technical topic. I want to thank you for doing so. I know it's because you're committed and this is very important to you. Again, another meeting tomorrow with the Advanced Planning Commission, where the presentation will be Advanced Planning Committee will be very similar. The comment period will be different. That's handled by TRPA and according to their hearings. Comment period wraps in early September. Please submit comments before then. And a reminder that there will be another round of discussion around the time of the release of draft anti-degradation analysis, draft NPDES permit, and final environmental document. I'm going to open the floor to any of my panelists, Kim or anybody else who wants to do a closing comment. They may or may not. I'll thank you once again for joining us today and joining this public session. Anybody else? Kim, would you like to do anything by way of closing?
I'll just reiterate the thank you again. We appreciate you all joining. Again, like Kaylin said, this is a lot of information, a lot of technical information, and I'll reiterate what I said before. Please submit your comments to TahoeKeysWeeds.org. Those specific substantive questions, comments, suggestions are all very helpful for us to get a good environmental document. That's why we do these processes, to get your feedback. So I really appreciate you taking the time to engage, and more to come.
Thanks for joining today. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks once again. Please reach out with your comments and questions. Thanks for your interest in this important project. Talk to you soon.